Hello, everyone. It is Neil here from EDM Tips for this week's Tuneful Tuesday. Welcome back to those of you who have been tuning in. For those of you who are new, this stream is a chance for me to review track submissions from members of our Radio Ready program and the EDM Tips Accelerator and get feedback right on the spot. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll start diving into some of these tracks. What I'd suggest is, if you're watching, post your comments in the chat, right? If you've got suggestions, it'll certainly help out the producers. It's also a great way to start training your own ear and start training your own productions. I know I always get people asking me like, "Hey, Neil, how do you hear these things? How do you recognize these things?" It's because of streams like this, right? Countless hours spent analyzing tracks, asking what can they do better? What are they doing that's making it work well? And over time, that sort of skill is going to manifest into your own productions. So don't just sit back and watch, actively take part, and you're going to get a lot out of this. So with that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get straight into it. So up first, we've got a submission coming from Gordon out of our Radio Ready program. And Gordon's saying, "Hey Neil, this is the updated version of my track from last week. Think it might have too many bass rumbles in it. Some general feedback would be great. Thanks." Let's see what we got. As always, guys, when I get started, I think I've set the volumes up correctly, but if you wouldn't mind confirming for me that you can hear my voice okay over the music, that would be much appreciated. All right, let's see what we got here, Gordon. Cool, nice start, good sense of atmosphere. Across this transition, I think I'd like a little bit more of like a reverb or a delay throw, just to help kind of smooth out that transition to the more energetic part. I am getting a tiny bit of mud in the low mid area. I think it's primarily coming from the bass. So Gordon, what I'd suggest doing is probably dialing back some of the processing on that bass. And then I hear a little bit of buildup right around like 140 to 160 hertz or so. So a small EQ reduction there should help out. I like that crash that's right there. I would either add a lot of like reverb or delay splash to it or find a longer splashier crash. The initial texture of it was good, it just ended a little bit abruptly. So Gordon, I love the melody that you've got going on in the background right here. I think it's a little bit too quiet and lost in the mix compared to the pads, the bass, and everything else. I would just bring up the volume of that melodic layer like 2 or 3 decibels. I know we're still in the build, so you don't want to give away the full energy of it, but a little bit more will help out. Okay, so nice work on that build up there. I think I like the way that you've kind of taken away a lot of the high end, taken away a lot of the low end. To make it a little bit stronger, I would actually just change where we ended up finishing the build. So right now the build finishes in like the low mids around like 600 to 900 hertz or so. I'd say instead, if you could shift that up so that you're cutting out more of the low end, but leaving a little bit more of the high end to finish closer to like the 2K to 4K range, that'll help give us more of a lifted sense of energy. And that way when the bass and the kick come in and the drop, you'll get a little bit more of a felt impact at that point. Awesome. Cool. Gordon, great work on this. I'd say, yeah, those main comments are the take care of it. The final thing that I might call out, because you mentioned, the sub rumbles and stuff, I didn't have too much of a problem with the rumble, but I did find myself wanting a little bit more from the sub bass itself. So maybe just bring up the sub bass by like a decibel. The kick is sounding really great. I just wasn't quite getting as much give and take between the kick and the sub bass as I'd be looking for. All right, so that takes care of that one. Up next, we've got a track submission from Sammy coming out of our Radio Ready program. And Sammy's saying at around 35 seconds. In general, I'm happy with the track, but is there any way to elevate this further, or do I need a vocal? I'm thinking of hiring someone. What options does one have, and what is a reasonable price for a vocal? All the best, Sammy. All right, let's start playing this and see what we got, and then yeah, I'll talk a little bit about vocals. Cool, really cool textures from the beginning. I think your use of reverb takes care of like our need for any sort of extra atmosphere or effects or anything else. Really great intro. The one thing that I noticed from the start though is that synth that's playing is pushed a little bit too far to the sides, and we've just got a touch of phasing as a result. So if you could dial back some of that imaging, again, just a small bit, that should help give us a little bit more body, and in case this song ever gets played in mono, it'll maintain a lot more presence at that point. I do think that right here would be a perfect place for like some sort of vocal or lead to have come in. In terms of your options for vocals, there's two main areas that I tend to look for. So the first one, if you're looking to, just kind of get it done with and have a professional experience, is soundbetter.com. Soundbetter is fantastic because there are loads of highly professional embedded singers and songwriters that can both write lyrics, sing, and perform them for you. The downside is that it is pretty pricey, and if you're looking at a custom vocal that has, lyrics, the main melody, harmonies, doubles, etc., you're probably looking at a price point of anywhere from like $300 to $600 for that. Another option is to look at a site called Vocal, VOKAAL.com. And there's a couple of options on that site. Is you can, again, pay for exclusive vocals where they'll custom, record and create something. And it'll be around $400 or so for that. But the other great site, the option that Vocal has, is they have, pre-recorded vocals that are non-exclusive that you can get for around like 30 to 50 bucks. And that's a great way to, just get vocals in a track that are pretty high quality. The one downside being, of course, is that they're not exclusive. So a couple of things to kind of make this one a little bit better too. I'd say the snare drum that you have has a great texture, but it's a little bit too dull. We need a little bit more brightness out of that. So bringing a high-end coloring EQ to lift some of that high-end splash and energy will help add a nice sense of energy. The same thing applies to your hi-hats there. At this point, I would love to hear some delay on this main synth riff starting to come in, and like a relatively fast delay, like an 8th note, or even maybe a 16th note delay, to start filling in a lot of that space and building a lot of energy coming up this next drop. The other thing I look for is, in your kick, you've got a nice sense of punch in the low end. I'm not quite getting the high-end energy out of this kick that I want. And I think you might be able to achieve that with just, again, some high-end coloring EQ boosts, but it might be worth looking for another kick sample with a little bit of like a tighter and snappier texture on top. The current one is a little bit loose and airy in contrast. Awesome, Sammy. Well, this is sounding fantastic. I really do think you are at the place where it is time to just go ahead and get a vocal in there. Let's give it up for Sammy there with Soft Dissuade. Up next, we've got a track submission from John Holland coming out of our Accelerator program. And John is saying it's just a work in progress, and only if there are not too many submissions that I already have a track from last week. My first electro swing effort. Well, John, we can definitely get you in here. So yeah, let's see what we've got with your first electro swing. Dance to the jazz and blues. Ooh, love that piano riff. That's a fantastic riff. John, the first thing that I'm noticing right here at this point, you've done a good job of selecting different elements in the stereo field. However, we do have a little bit of competition tonally among the elements. Not as though they're like hitting notes that conflict with each other, but they're all playing in roughly the same octave range. So either using different instruments with different timbres to create more space and separation from the low mid chords, the high end melodies, or just bumping up, again, some of the notes of the chords or the melodies up in an octave to create a little bit more separation between them, I think would help. Fantastic riff and getting groove here. I think for this main horn lead that you've got going on, I would like a little bit more saturation, a little bit more brightness on that to bring it forward. The biggest thing that I'm actually noticing in here is you have this vocal that's been playing, throughout a lot of this song. I think the vocal makes it just a little bit too busy to have it be consistent. So rather than having to be, a consistent thread throughout the song, pick a few phrases here and there that you want and saturate those, bring those out, let those play, and, pause some of the other instrumental layers at those moments so that we get a really clear switch up from instrumental to, vocal phrases and then back to instrumental. Really cool composition, fantastic bounce, as we've got Slayer Dark Raver saying in there. One thing I would probably suggest with that piano is, it felt a little bit too wide, so I'm getting some of that phasing content. It shouldn't be too bad because it's mostly high end, so even if you sum it to mono, it should be, sitting nicely in the mix. However, right now it does feel a little bit separate from the other elements, so I'd probably just narrow out that piano again just a touch to bring it back into the front of the mix, because right now it's kind of wrapping around the back of my head. Awesome, John. Hey, really fantastic effort again, especially being your first electro swing take. I do love how you've been playing around with different genres and sounds and styles and stuff. That's going to help you loads as you, continue to build your own project. All right. Up next, we got a track submission from Eric coming out of our Accelerator program. He's saying, I'd like some feedback on the verses, pre-choruses, and choruses. The builds, intro, and outro are still work in progress. Totally fine. All right, so yeah, let's see what we got. I'll kind of skip ahead into the verse.
Crowded places, feel it sinking in. Lonely faces, say you need a friend.
Okay, so fantastic writing, great use of space. You're highlighting the vocal and not taking away from it, which is completely crucial for a good quality vocal like this. One thing I would say though is you probably could saturate and bring up your instrumentals a little bit more in the mix. They're just a tiny bit too quiet. Like that piano could definitely use a little bit more weight on those chords.
Feeling low and it's out of your control. You should know that I won't leave you. I'll stay beside you. I'm never letting you go. You've been lost and alone in the city lights, I know. But I will guide you. Lost and alone in the city lights.
Awesome transition there. I think leading up to the build and then in the drop, I would like a little bit more distortion and energy introduced to the chords, and then in the drop especially, I want a lot more energy coming out of it. Don't get me wrong, I like, again, how you're highlighting the vocal. I just think we still have a little too much space for the vocal and not quite enough energy out of that instrumental.
You've been lost and alone in the city lights, I know. But I will guide you.
I know you said the build was still a work in progress, but I figured that might help nonetheless.
Fight your battles, always.
The one layer that I'd probably leave exactly as is your string. I think that does create a lovely sense of distance, and we don't want that to come up because that will start to swallow the vocal a little too much. Kind of the same comment goes for the drums as well. I think we could just squeeze a little bit more energy and presence out of those in general.
No more inhibitions. I'll show you I care. You've been lost and alone in the city.
Right at that moment, I would like some sort of like impact or sub drop, something to help kind of transition us out of the energy of the drums into this, empty space section. Ooh, great use of vocal delay right there. Sounds like you've got like a little textured delay on there. It's not just like a plain old delay, and that's working fantastically. Awesome, Eric. And good con, just I can't pause this right before the drop. Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, let's give it up for Eric there. Really fantastic work. Up next, I've got a track submission from Tommy coming out of our Radio Ready program. He says, this track is from the competition. I struggle with the hard drops. They are weak. Please, you can check the lame drop at 110. How to make it harder. Yeah, let's see what we got here. Tommy with Other Side. And I'll just kind of play through the intro all the way up through that drop so we get a little bit of context to it as well. Cool. So I like the texture and the ambience of your intro. I think that the main kind of lead that you have going on in there, the pitchy one that has a little bit of portamento, is just a little bit too distracting from everything else. You can probably just get rid of that lead, and the instrumentals and pads that you've got are going to be plenty interesting. Compositionally, this is mostly working. The high-level chords that are playing on the sides, I think, are just a little bit too high. I would take one or two of those voices and pitch them down an octave or two. Because they're on the sides, you should still be leaving enough space for the vocal to be sitting in there. But right now, we're not quite getting the weight that we need. We're just getting a lot of high-end airing inside of those chords. Cool. So this drop, I think, compositionally is working well enough. To make it hit a little bit harder, I'd focus on bringing out the fill right beforehand, bring that up in volume and saturate it so that we kind of prepare the listener for a sense of bigness. In the drop itself, I think your drums as a whole could come up a decent amount in volume relative to everything else in the mix. Especially the kick, for me, is really getting lost to everything. So boost that kick up a decent amount and should help. So I'm going to skip ahead to the second drop and play that one more time, too. Another thing that could help just to create a little bit more energy is some sort of like crash or impact at the start of your drops. That'll help bring an added sense of high-end splashes. The other thing I'd say is that it sounds like we've just got a little bit too much like reverb or like a low-mid pad sort of layer in here. It's kind of tough to tell which one. I'd say it's probably a little bit of both. So I would just dial that back a little bit and then instead focus on saturating your main chords, saturating your lead, taking out a little bit of that reverb, because what that reverb is doing is it's pushing everything back in space and it's making things feeling like they're, really hard and present. Melodically, again, and compositionally, though, I think you've done a really good job here. I think the majority of your focus just needs to be on the mix, and that'll be what gets the drop to really hit. Awesome, let's give it up for Tommy there. Up next, we got a track from Colin out of our Accelerator program. He's saying, hey, Neil, looking for overall feedback on the production and mixing quality. Thanks a lot, appreciate it. Yeah, Colin, let's see what we got with Sympathia. Gabriel in the chat, I see you. Yeah, you're right. That was the right, or that was the submission from the remix competition for sure. Cool. So Colin, really good job creating some extra evolution throughout this intro. I think that's working pretty well. One thing I'd like is on this kind of main mid-range bell layer that's playing every 16th note, like that chord bell, we'll call it. I know it's not quite a bell, but whatever it is. I'd like a little bit more brightness and a little bit more tightness on the envelope of that layer, so that we get a little bit more bounciness and a little bit more energy coming from it. Another thing that I'd like between the low mid bass layer that's playing and that high end layer is a little bit more of like a sidechain pump against the kick. Not from a mixing purpose, but from a groove purpose. So we get on that very first hit, it's a little bit quieter, and then it kind of swells and grows up over the next couple hits. Love that synth riff. But you've got two options here. I think this track is kind of sitting in the middle of what it could be either way. So it could either be a really nice, energetic, dancey track, in which case I'd focus on saturating the bass, bringing out a little bit more high-end texture from it, maybe creating a little bit of width on that bass, and really highlighting the bass as a driving element. Or if you want this to be a little bit more of a chill, laid-back sort of track, I would actually decrease our emphasis on the bass a little bit, so that it's a little bit warmer, a little bit rounder, and a little bit more tucked into the mix. I'm going to just skip ahead, see what we got kind of going on in the next drop. Because this whole midsection and your verses and stuff are sounding really nice. Cool. Like that vocal, you could probably bring that vocal up just a couple of decibels right before the drop for some added energy. So on this high-end lead, one thing I think that would take this, to the next level is a little bit more automation and like the volume, the filter cutoff, and maybe some saturation. So right now it kind of feels like it's staying consistent, this like da 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 da. Well, if at times you like really kind of lean into that and like open it up, get a little bit more drive, create this nice swell in energy, and then you can bring that right back down, before this main melody riff comes in. All right, fantastic work here, Colin. You're getting a lot of good support in the chat here. So yeah, let's give it up one more time for Colin with Sympathia. Up next, we got a track submission coming from Navy side. That's Mr. Steve coming out of our Accelerator program, saying, "Hey Neil, submitting this again as I'm not sure the first one worked properly. Sorry if there's two. You're good, Steve. I think this is the one that I got. So glad you resubmitted. Could you go from 236 with any tips on the low end to the mix and anything generally for improvement, please? Thank you." Yeah, let's see what we got here with Get Loose. Really cool automation and great sense of push and pull here. I do think that this like chord layer that you got, like the main synth sound, would sound great with a little bit of added width to it. It does seem a little bit central in the mix, and then as a result, things are separate from that really wide, distant, atmospheric texture that you've got in there too. Really cool groove and riff going on here. Cool. So I know one of your questions was kind of about the low end. I think the bassline riff that you've got is absolutely fantastic. The kick is sounding great. What I'm lacking is the sub end weight of this bass. So I'd probably duplicate that bass layer and then play it an octave lower with a sub bass just for some added weight and thickness. Another thing I think that would help, so kind of similar to my Sari with comment on those previous chords, these chords that are hitting on the, I think the downbeat, yeah, the downbeat chords, like the down, those particular layers would sound great with some added width, just because you have a lot of information already coming in your center. So this will help create a little bit more push and pull between the mids and the sides of your mix. All right, so if every side we get a big hit and we kind of focus back in on the center and then we go back to the sides for those hits, and create a nice sense of breathing in the stereo bit of that track. During that section, I love that like little filter of everything but that main high lead. I do think that the lead needs something to have happen during that time as well. So maybe just like automate a phaser up through that lead at that same moment. Just create some extra energy and interest and match the rest of the automation that's happening. See, the biggest thing that I focus on is creating a little bit more dynamic range and separation among your elements in that front backspace. Like the percussion layers that you've got could probably come forward in the mix, help drive a little bit more energy. That lead that you've got does feel a little bit distant, so maybe bringing out a little bit more of the high end. The Fresh Air plugin by Slate Digital is a great tool to help with this presence. So just kind of bring that forward a little bit more. You can drive the track a little bit more organically with that. Awesome. All right, well, let's give it up for Nevy's side. That's Mr. Steve with Get Loose. Up next, I've got a track coming from Jeff, coming out of our Radio Ready program. Looking for just some feedback from about 31 to 118. Tell you what, Jeff, we can play a little bit more of that since we got a little extra time for today's stream. There aren't quite as many submissions as we've had in a couple of weeks past. So yeah, let's just see what we got with Origin. Great drive energy right from the start here. So I do love this wide, like, splashy layer. It's kind of like a secondary snare that's coming in. I think it sounds great. The one problem is that we've got a little bit of a separation between the far sides and the center of the mix. So if you could take the bass line or some of the other layers, like maybe the hi-hats, and add just a touch of width to it so that we get something kind of in the middle. We've got like our central drums, something in the middle, and then that'll connect us to that far wide splashy side of that snare. Love this, little riff that's coming in, that pad-like synth layer. I do think that the sustain on it is a little bit too heavy, so I would take down, like if you've got 2 layers, just dial back the pad part and bring out the melody. If it's all one layer, then maybe just kind of dial back a little bit of the reverb wetness, a little bit of the release, so we get a tiny bit more attention to the actual primary melody itself. Nice transition there. Love the sub drop coupled with the high-end effects splash. I do think that like that snare fill right before that transition moment could probably come up in volume and brightness just a touch. A very faint delay on this melody would be a nice touch to help just emphasize our sense of space, fill in a little bit of the emptiness between those hits, but the primary reason would be, like, again, a very faint delay to create a nice sense of distance in the mix. So leading up to this synth riff, I might suggest like a white noise riser or something, just because the synth riff does come in with a lot of energy suddenly, and just like a quick whoosh would help just bridge the gap between the previous section and that build. Cool. So in this drop, I'd like a little bit, kind of similar to one of the tracks we heard earlier, rather than kind of filtering down and bringing us to the low mids, I'd filter and open up to bring us to the upper mids a little bit more. That way, when the kick comes in, we feel a little bit more impact in the drop. Awesome. All right, well, fantastic work. Let's give it up for Jeff. Up next, we got a track coming from Yaniv out of our Accelerator program. And he's looking for feedback on the break and the drop starting at around 2 minutes. Yeah, let's see what we got with Feel the Vibe. Cool, so great use of a sub drop there. I think that is really nicely connecting our energy. One thing I would like, and it might not even be a sub drop, it might have just been a sub bass. Either way, that very low end is working well. I would like a little bit more of a thud of an impact at the start of that break, though, like a boom sort of sound, as opposed to just like a boom. That way we'll get a little bit more of a finality and kind of a period to the end of the drop. Cool sense of polyrhythm coming in thanks to this new, synth that's playing. I do think that this synth is a little bit too wide, and again, we're getting just a touch of phasiness as a result. So if you just narrow out, you probably don't even narrow out the entirety of that layer, but everything below, say like 1,000 hertz or so, you just narrow that out a touch. That should help create a little bit more body and fix that phasing issue. So in this section, like, I'm having a tough time feeling the groove, and that's okay. I almost feel like that's part of the intention of this break. You don't want people to, be dancing as hard as they can. So what I would do is actually lean into that. Maybe add a little bit more of a reverb washout or a delay throw onto that main synth riff that's been playing. That'll help just like really communicate to the listener, hey, like, yeah, we've got this cool active rhythm, but don't worry, you're not supposed to necessarily feel a tight groove. So I think now that the drums are back, we've got a great sense of the groove. A couple of things that I would do to improve this. I think we need a little bit more power from the bass. I'm getting a lot from the low mids, like in the pads and the chord layers, but I'm not quite getting the low end drive from like a bass layer that I'm looking for. So we need a lot more thickness and presence on that bass. Another thing that I like is a little bit more high-end energy. All right, so this will come in both the drums, just bringing out those drums, those cymbals a little bit more, and then also in the synth, if we could just add a little bit of extra brightening, saturation, or high-end coloring EQ to bring out a little bit more energy, I think that'll all help. Well, at this point, I think you've done a good job with most of your transitioning in. I'd like a little bit of like a synth hit at that time, like a final note from that ARP layer or something else of the sort. It's like a da that kind of echoes out to really again help bridge the gap from the high-end energy of the ARP into this more like mid-range, low-end focused section of the break. All right, let's give it up for Yaniv there with Feel the Vibe. Again, great composition, fantastic work once again. I think those couple of mixing changes will do a lot to help you out. All right, up next, I got a track submission from Michael out of our Accelerator program, and he's saying, "Hey, Neil and Will would really like some general feedback on this track. This is my first attempt to make a proper trance track. This is a quick mix down I did, and the track is not mastered. I used Rank 1's Awakening as a reference track because I really like the drive in that tune. Do you have any advice on how the vocal and spoken words could sit better in the mix? Thanks for your feedback. Really appreciate this. Cheers." Yeah, sure thing, Michael. Let's see what we got with Night Stims, and I will be sure to pay attention to that vocal. Great energy in the drums. I love the presence that's coming out of them. They are driving forward the track, giving me a good sense of groove.
I feel you.
This main kind of synth lead that's playing, like the da-da-da-da-da, it's a little bit too noisy and thin. I would probably, shelf down a little bit of that high end and bring a little bit more mid-range body to it. So if in the synth it's been filtered out, or even afterwards it's been filtered out, I would undo some of that. If it hasn't been filtered out at all, then it might be worth adding another layer that has more mid-range body and power to it. The other thing to note is that high-end synth is taking away from some of the energy of our hi-hats and drums. So in the drop, when both of these are playing together, I would bring up the volume of that drum kit a decent amount. Particularly the kick for me is a little bit too weak, and then the hi-hats are getting just a tiny bit lost in comparison. I think there might be a little bit too much of the reverb or pad-like texture on this song. It's creating a little bit too much distance and washiness. We're not quite getting the drive and the power we need. So if you just dial that back some, and kind of similar to the last track, if we just add a little bit more drive and power to the synth elements themselves and not the reverb, that'll help create a little bit of a stronger sense of presence. Well, so in terms of the vocals, because I know that was one of your questions, the reason why those vocals aren't quite cutting through the mix is that they're very airy and, they're a whisper of spoken word. So they're sitting very high up here in the frequency spectrum. And they're playing at the same time that you've got other high-end frequency elements playing, like this synth riff that's playing right now. So the noise of this synth riff that's taking up a lot of this high-end band is just swallowing up that vocal. So the first thing that I would do is just compositionally change your arrangement a little bit so that when the vocal plays, there isn't any other high-end information playing, like that high-end synth layer. Past that, I do think that, maybe a little bit of saturation, and then if you can bring up a tiny bit more of the information below 7 or 8 kilohertz, that should help add a little bit more of a felt presence to those and not necessarily take away from the airiness, but give us a little bit more intelligibility around what the vocal itself is saying. All right, awesome work there. Let's give it up for Michael. Up next, we've got a track submission from Yan Yap coming out of our Accelerator program. And Yan Yap's looking for suggestions on the transition into the break at around 2:05, saying that the first 8 to 16 bars seems that they can use something additional. And he's also saying this is the first track I'm using vocals, so please some feedback on how they're placed at the timestamps in the break, the 44, sorry, at 4:46, and then drop 3 at 5:43. And then lastly, the dynamic range in the drop after the break seems a bit off. Let's see how we can improve. Okay, yeah, sure thing. Let's see what we got here, Yan Yap. All right, so I think you said 2:05, so we'll skip kind of ahead to that. I think that transition's working well. One thing that will just help make it work a little bit better is a little bit more of like a delay throw on the synths as we kind of get to that transition moment. We get a nice little sense of echo that fades out. You asked, you said the first 8 to 16 bars seem that they can use something additional. Honestly, don't know that we need it. I do think it's, interesting enough. If anything, like, again, a tiny bit of extra delay in there to help create some space and sparkle. But at this point in the song, like, you've got an interesting synth riff. You've got a lovely, lush pad sound in the background. So I think it's a great way of just, slowly building up our energy. Maybe a very tiny, like, effects noise-like layer with a pulse to it that's kind of going that sort of texture would be nice on top of this all. That's kind of up to you. I don't know that it, like, needs it, but that could help add some extra energy. All right, let's skip ahead to that 4:46 section and kind of see what's going on with the vocals in that moment. Cool. Okay, so the same vocal that was playing earlier. I love this in there. It's like a nice vocal pad. It creates this lovely, lush sense of space. Still a nice sense of heightened energy to it. I don't know that I have any complaints with the way that vocal's sitting in the mix. Cool, so in the drops, I would like a little bit more low-end drive coming from like a sub bass. Your upper mid bass is sounding pretty nice, but we're just lacking that information between the upper mid bass, which is sitting right here, and the low-end thump of the kick, which is sitting a little bit lower there. So again, just like another sub bass layered in there with maybe a little bit of drive and saturation on to help give us some thickness and some extra texture could be a nice little help. At this point in the drop, you could probably bring up the volume of that vocal pad just a bit. And then it might also be worth adding a touch of OTT to the vocal at this point for a little bit more airiness and brightness. I would only do that during the drop because in the breakdown, we benefit from the warmth and the, thickness of it. But at this point, we have a lot of other elements that are contributing to the thickness and contributing to the energy. So we need to just bring up that vocal pad and air it out a little bit with some OTT. Awesome. All right, well, let's give it up for Yan Yap. Fantastic work on this. I think the composition and the vibe is spot on. These are just small mixing things here and there that, again, will elevate this to the next level. All right, let's see. Up next, I've got a track submission coming from Jamie out of our Radio Ready program. Looking for feedback on 58 seconds, 141, and 239. Yeah, let's see what we've got here with Burn Up. Nice intro, nice sense of texture, open space. Love that like slight delay that was on that synth riff. You could probably extend the feedback so that it echoes out for a little bit longer. And just a touch more delay on that would be perfect. You're really close. Like even enough to hear just one more echo on that would be good. That little vocal sample that just played felt a little bit out of space, had a little bit too much mid-range to it. So I would just kind of carve out some of that information below like 1100 hertz, and that should help fit it into the sense of space better.
Burn up with this
It's fine once the full vocal is playing. It was only that chop moment that felt a little off. You know what? I take that back. I do think we could still take away a little bit of the low mids of that vocal even in this drop section. So right now, I think that the hi-hats are swallowing up the vocal just a little bit. I would just spread those hi-hats nice and wide. We've got a lot of space for it. We've already established that space with the wide atmosphere, so we might as well use that empty space for those hi-hats to fill that out and create a lot more space in the center for that vocal to really stand out clearly. Nice transition. Love the delay throw. This low mid synth that just came in there was a little bit muddy. I think you could probably wait to just bring that in until a little bit later once everything else has faded a bit more. So during that kind of whole section, I do find myself wanting a little bit more. So maybe like having some melodic layer that plays a little bit more persistently. Like when you have those vocal chops and those occasional synth fills, that's exactly what we need. There's just a bit too much empty space between. I think compositionally this section's working well. The biggest thing I have is that, the atmospheres are almost a little bit too present. They're the, most noticeable part of this track, where we should really be having the drums and some of these melodic elements standing out a little bit more so than the pads. So consider, either dialing back the pads a touch or just bringing up our drums and our occasional synth fills a little bit. Awesome. All right. Well, fantastic work there. Let's give it up for Jamie with his track Burn Up. Up next, we got a track coming from Felipe out of our Accelerator program, looking for just some overall feedback. Yeah, let's see what we've got with Traveler. Great start, good use of effects, splash, and atmosphere. Plenty of interest, but not too much content in there. Yeah, fantastic start. I love the use of stereo space here. Our drums are sitting right in the center really clearly. We've got this wide pad layer, and then just inside of it, we have that wide pluck layer. This new kind of central mid-range riff that's come in, great composition, great sound selection. It's a little bit too thin, so I would add just a touch of saturation on that to help thicken it up. Love that drop. Way to build up a lot of high-end atmosphere and energy on the sides, and then in the drop, cut to that like kind of low mid and upper mid, just driving power in the center. This main kind of pluck that's going on in the top end could probably use just a little bit more saturation and drive to it to give us just a tiny bit more high-end bite. It really doesn't need much though. So I think your kick is mixed nicely in. There's a nice sense of top end to it. The one thing I'd like is a little bit more work on the kick and sub relationship. So the sub is really nice and strong and almost a touch too strong, but it's to the point that I'm hearing a very consistent layer of the sub and not really feeling the kick thump through that sub. So one, I would set up a little bit more side chaining between those two layers so that anytime the kick plays, that sub does duck a little bit. That'll help with the mix and the power of the kick, but it'll also give a little bit more groove to the low end. Two, like I said, just bring down that sub a touch. add a little bit more high-end coloring EQ to the drums, or use a tool like Decapitator set to the emo to give that high-end bite. That'll just help give a little bit of extra energy and drive coming from our drum kit. And that primarily applies to the snare and the hi-hats. You could do it to the overall kit with your kick included too as well. I love the melodic riff that you've got playing here. One other thing that could probably help is if you layer in that main melody line that you've got, take another synth, pitch that up an octave, and subtly layer that in. That'll give us just a little bit more lift, a little bit more separation from the low end of our mix, and give us just a nice little touch of energy for that main melody. All right, and fantastic work with that transition, by the way, too. Let's give it up for Felipe there with Traveler. Up next, we got a track coming from Gabriel out of our Accelerator program and saying, "Hey Neil, in the EDM Tips community, I made this track trying to mix the dark vibes of techno with melodic elements of future rave and trance. Hope you guys like it. For the feedback, I want to know if the low end is too much, because sometimes I think it is, and sometimes I think it's not powerful at all. So big dilemma, haha." For sure, I've been there. Also on the breakdown to the second drop, the transitions, and as always, you can skip to the second 54 to avoid the annoying long intro. All right, awesome, Gabriel. Let's see what we got with the Afterlife. You said, I think, about 54 seconds. That was it. Cool, so your kick is so powerful right here in a good way, but I do think we need a heavier impact at this transition moment to give us a little bit more of an initial thud. Awesome power coming from the low end of that kick. You know, it is a lot, but I don't know if I'd call it too much. I think that's what's going to drive a lot of the energy of this track. Like, if I'm picturing this being played out on the stage, right? And it's going to be that really heavy bass that gets people going. So I think it's totally fine. This main synth riff that you have, that wow, wow, wow sort of layer, would probably sound great with a touch of added width to it. You don't need it to be super wide, but you've got a lot of empty space, so even just taking it from like here to something like this would probably help out. Cool. Same thing at this transition moment. Like, maybe even just layer in a part of like the filtered kick for a little bit more low end thump at the transition point. Awesome. Very chilling sense of space and vibe right here. That bass line would probably benefit from a little bit of added width to it. I know typically we don't want a lot of width in our bass line, but because this is the breakdown, we can lean into some of that muddiness, some of that washiness that a wide bass will create. Love this ARP that's coming in. The one thing I'm noticing is that the groove of the clap seems to be a little bit off. And I suppose it could be the groove of the ARP. I'm just kind of like weighing the clap against the ARP. The timing of those transients is just a tiny bit off each other. So I would zoom into each one of those and just make sure that they're fitting really tightly in the pocket. Nice transition and kind of fake out into this next build. Awesome build, awesome drop here. I think one thing I'd like is a little bit more brightness and a touch of noise coming out of the main lead once the drop hits, just for that added extra high-end energy. You could probably achieve that just like within the synth itself, layering in a faint bit of noise, or just adding some extra distortion and saturation to the lead. Compositionally, though, this is absolutely killer. So let's give it up for Gabriel there with the Afterlife. Fantastic work. Up next, I've got a track submission from Jeff Wyckoff coming out of our Accelerator program, and he's saying, "This is the official remix I did for the youth context. They said that I am allowed to use it on any form of social media, so I think it should be okay to use here. Thanks for including that, Jeff. Always appreciated." For those of you that are kind of wondering about remixes, because I know we don't typically allow remixes on the stream in case it gets taken down. If you're given express permission to post a remix, then it's totally okay to share it here. It's just like the times where it may not have been given that permission that we do really risk that. So thank you for including that, Jeff. And you're saying just, curious on your thoughts on it. There is a DJ intro and outro. Sweet. I'll go ahead and skip past that little bit so that we get into the, body of the track. So let's see what we got with Hang On. Awesome vibe here. I love the pad layers, this upper mid synth, and the texture of this bass is really close too. I think the one thing that I look for in that bass is actually adding a little bit more reverb to it to help kind of push it back, warm it up just a touch. So a couple of things. So with that bass, again, a little bit more reverb, but then maybe also add just like another layer an octave lower to help give us a little bit more low end weight. It all needs to be very subtle in the mix though. I do think these vocals are a little bit loud, so I would just dial them back. It's like probably 3 to 5 decibels. This lead vocal's totally fine, so it's really just those harmony layers that were too loud. So not something that you need to do, but I do think it'll help create more space for the vocal, is setting up some heavier sidechaining on your instrumental layers against the vocals so that they duck a little bit more every time that lead vocal plays. Lovely drum pattern there. Fantastic groove. It's matching the vibe of the track perfectly. The vibe and the melody of the synth are fantastic. But one thing, if I'm being super picky about this, Jeff, the one thing that I would say is that the motif of the melody of your synth doesn't really match the motif of the vocal itself, right? So we have the da 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 da, and forgive my terrible singing, and then we have that hang on. So we have a couple of key rhythmic phrases in that vocal, the da 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 sort of texture, and I'd like a little bit more of that implemented into the melody. So we have a nice clear connection between your synth melody and the vocal melody. So I love the Foley that you've got in there. That particular Foley, because it's got a nice sense of space and real world texture, would sound great with some added width to it. The way I always like to describe it is, in the real world, we hear Foley sorts of sounds all around. It's never a mono or central signal. So spread that out nice and wide and it'll feel even more realistic. Awesome. Cool, really cool transition there. Fantastic work with this remix as a whole, Jeff. Like I said, the biggest thing that I would say, and again, it's being pretty picky, but if you can get that melodic riff to just match a little bit more of the motifs of the main vocal melody, you'll be in a great spot. And good luck with that remix competition, by the way. All right, up next, we got a track submission from Party Pre coming out of our Accelerator, looking for some general feedback on the sound design and thoughts on how to make the second drop more impactful with more tension. Yeah, let's see what we got here with Yasmina. Lovely vibe. Great use of that vocal chop and now this tiny bit of crowd noise. Good sense of ear candy, keeps us just interested enough. Fantastic vibe going on. So there is this like high-end synth pattern that's matching your main like mid-range chord. I think the envelope of that is just a little bit too delayed. Like we have that attack coming in a touch too late, so it's throwing off the vibe just a tiny bit. It almost sounds like a little bit funkier in comparison to this very warm vibe that everything else is giving off. So I would just, tighten up that attack a little bit so that it's matching this main mid-range chord layer that you've got. I think your verse sections are like pretty much perfect here. The vibe of that vocal and the vibe of your synths and everything are matching each other really, really nicely. Like there's a very clear motion that's going on here. I think I would suggest bringing up your percussion a little bit, just in volume and in thickness with some extra saturation to help drive a little bit more presence and energy into the track. That's something that's just kind of like a marquee of modern music, is that we have a lot of presence on the drums. It didn't always used to be that way, but nowadays that does kind of tend to be a defining feature for a successful song. So this main like synth layer that's playing on the downbeats, this wow, 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 it kind of has a similar comment to what I was talking about with that initial layer. I think the envelope of it is just throwing off the vibe and the groove just a touch. So instead of like this really like slow wow, 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 I might make it a little bit more plucky, so it's more like a down, down, down sort of layer. That'll help drive a little bit more consistency along the rest of your instrumental. Awesome composition here. Again, same comment as earlier. I think the biggest thing that you could do is drive more energy into the drums, like getting that kick to cut through a little bit more heavily, getting a little bit more energy out of like the mid-range percussion. That's gonna help drive a lot of extra interest in this track. Awesome work. All right, let's give it up for Party Preet with Yasmina. Really beautiful track there. Up next, we got a track submission from Maxwell out of our Accelerator program, looking for feedback on the overall feel of the track. As usual, there's no proper mixing, only a level balance. I attempted using my AirPods to volume adjust, and I'm curious to see how it turned out. I prefer using my monitors, but this time around I gave my headphones a try. This is only the first 2 minutes, so if possible and time permits, you could play the full track. I appreciate it. Yeah, let's see what we got. We could definitely play the full track here. In terms of using the AirPods, I'm all for that. I love my AirPods Pro for analyzing mixes, for even doing some basic mixing work. The quality's surprisingly good for those. So yeah, nothing wrong with that. I'm gonna start this over because I was like talking mindlessly over the first like 10 seconds there. Awesome vibe going on here. This kind of like more lo-fi chill vibe of the drums is matching that filtered vibe of the synths. So I do like that vocal coming in there. I would say like at the point where it starts to filter in, just come in with it and maybe, have a reverse reverb or a little vocal chop leading up to that so that it doesn't, just like come into abruptly. But I think at the time you start to filter in is when it should be playing in full. Fantastic groove, fantastic vibe here. I know you haven't like gotten deep into the mix here. I would still say like the vocal does probably need to come up in volume a little bit. The nice thing is your sense of stereo space allows us to still hear this vocal really clearly. But I think it's still just a little bit too quiet to steal our attention because my ears are primarily still drawn to like the side synths and the drums more so than that vocal. cool. I love that little like guitar riff that just came in right there. I would bring that up a touch in volume and then bring out more of the high end with some extra saturation, maybe a tool like the Oxford Inflator to bring out more top texture. So right here, I'm getting a little bit of tonal conflict between the vocal and the synth. Yeah, right there. I think that vocal is not quite in key with the rest of the track, so I might work on that particular vocal to get it to match your instrumental. Yeah, it is just, it's in a slightly different key than what your instrumental is playing throughout this whole section. So it's that new kind of second vocal that's in this latter half of the song. Awesome work here, Max. One kind of final thing that you could do to help kind of improve this is, because we have a relatively consistent beat in an instrumental, is creating just like stops every once in a while, where the beat just stops for an extra beat or two. Maybe the instrumental cuts with it and we have like a vocal phrase that fills in that empty space. And then everything comes right back in. That'll create a nice like sense of, a moment in the track that really makes it stand out. Awesome, let's give it up for Maxwell there with Cinnamon. That track was called Cinnamon. You're absolutely right about that, Maxwell. All right, up next, we got a track submission from Aviral coming out of our Accelerator, looking for a general overview of this remix. It has not been mixed or mastered as per competition rules. The song is allowed to be posted on SoundCloud and Facebook. Thank you for including that as well, Aviral. This is my first ever attempt at a remix of any sorts. The song is not complete, mixed, or mastered, so thanks in advance. Yeah, let's see what we've got with this Varsky Hypnotic remix. Cool, so the first thing that I'd say is it's not necessarily a mixing thing, but it does impact the mix. So the texture of our kick and the texture of this bass are sitting like right on top of each other. So you've got a very knocky, mid-range focused kick, and that's exactly what that bass is. So I would probably look for like a deeper kick sound or swap out the bass sound for something a little bit deeper and more separate from that mid-range kick. Love the pumping on this vocal. Really cool effect to create a nice sense of rhythm. Awesome drop. The minimalist design of this drop is what's making it work, right? You have a lot going on in the mid-range, a lot of motion in that vocal, and then we get hit with this like low-end kick and bass with these occasional high-end synth hits and throws. Really fantastic composition here.
There's something strange in you and the way you do. Got a feeling that I know where you're going to. When I see the light change in your eyes, yeah, you're so hypnotic.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't have a single point of feedback compositionally for you. I want to hear this when it's fully mixed and mastered. I'd probably add it into my sets. This is a vibe. So you know what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call out some of the things that you've done correctly here, because I can't identify anything that you've done wrong so far. You started out, like I said, with that really simple minimalist drop. And over time, you add like one element at a time that just fills in a little bit more space in its own pocket in that sense of like the stereo field and the vertical field. And as a result, by the time we get to the end, we have this very energetic, very full drop, but it's not too much for us to digest because we've been given each piece of the puzzle one at a time along the way. The one thing, if I'm just being super picky at this point, I'd like some sort of like high-end splash or atmosphere. I hear that you have that distant pad layer, but it's a little bit too much of like a distant pad layer as opposed to like a top-end energetic sweep. Love the switch up to the triplet rhythm. Every once in a while, I would just add some extra roll so that we're getting like a that'll just create a little bit more interest in motion. I can guarantee that that'll get the dance floor moving for sure. Oh, and you just did one right there. Perfect. Yeah, just get a few more of those a little bit earlier. Man, this is a fantastic tune. This is hands down the best one of yours that I've heard here, Aviral. So definitely keep me posted on that as you finish up the mix. I would love to hear more of it on one of these Tuneful Tuesdays. And if you don't feel like submitting it for a Tuneful Tuesday, please do send that my way at the end. I'd love to put that in my sets because I can guarantee, like I said, like the design of that would get the dance floor moving. Awesome. All right, let's give it up for Aviral there. Last but not least, we got a track submission coming from Tim out of our Radio Ready program saying this is just an idea in progress, mainly today's work. I would like any suggestions for an analog synth patch that sounds something like the loop I have coming in around 40 seconds in the pre-drop. I've used an analog lead synth patch from Nexus for now, but would probably like to get something like the same sound. This is thrown together, so no mixing or etc. Totally fine. Let's see what we got with Don't Talk About It. Awesome composition from the start. The first thing that I'm noticing is that when this vocal comes in, there's a little bit too much else going on in the mix, that's stealing away our attention. So when that vocal comes in, I might suggest pausing the guitar for just a second, or at least filtering out the guitar when that vocal first comes in so that we get a very clear attention draw to the vocal. This high-end synth that you've just brought in, great texture. I think it just comes in a little bit too abrupt. So I would, filter us into that lead a little bit more. I'm guessing that's the Nexus patch you're using, and you're talking about trying to match it a little bit more closely. That like that very distant sort of layer that's moving up and down. I think just filtering out your synth a lot would help out. And then if you're going to design something like this in Serum, I can't point you towards like a specific patch, but I will say that like a filtered square wave that has that same sort of pitch movement between it should get you pretty close. The other thing I'd say is like when everything else is playing, like we don't really need the vocal to be playing at this point because you've already got enough interest going on. Oops, let me pause this. You've got enough interest going on between everything else that's playing at that moment. So, Tim, fantastic work. Like I said, just focus on creating a little bit more space for that vocal, for that lead that you have introduced. Filter it out, especially to begin with, and then try, like I said, a filtered square wave could help out as well. All right, really quickly, I just want to acknowledge in the chat, Slayer Dark Raver. I think if I remember correctly, that's Matt's. Correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't seen a submission come through for you today, so there's a chance that, for whatever reason, it just didn't go through properly, and I'm reloading my submission form right now. And unfortunately, I did time out everything, and I do have to get going here. But if you do resubmit here, Matts, we'll be sure to get to you first next week. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, that takes care of it. So thank you very much, as always, for tuning in. It's been a pleasure hosting these. I'm already looking forward to the next one. Keep up the fantastic work across the board. It's been awesome just watching you guys all rapidly improve. You guys are well on your way to some just highly professional tracks, and some of you are, honestly already there. So keep up the great work. Thank you for tuning in. And once again, for those of you watching for the first time, if you are interested in getting feedback on your tracks, all you need to do is be enrolled in either the Radio Ready program or our marquee EDM Tips Accelerator. To find out more about either of those, simply visit our website. You'll see a link in the description of this video right now where you can learn a little bit more about the Accelerator. The Radio Ready program is kind of like a pared back version of that, where you get access to all of our other courses. The Accelerator being like, our really big in-depth, it's an 8-week long program where we go into as much detail as we possibly can on every step of the production process to get you, producing really professional music. And I'd say, the work of the students that you guys have heard in the stream is an absolute testament to that. We're seeing some serious results. People are getting signed, starting to play major festivals, getting music supported by BBC Radio, other major DJs. It's been absolutely awesome to watch as a coach. So I want to give a shout out to all of our existing students. Keep up the hard work, and if you're at all interested in joining the program, please do join us. It's loads of fun. I love working with you guys, helping you guys improve your music. Will does as well, and we'd love to see more of you in there. So guys, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you all have a wonderful week ahead. I'll look forward to catching the members around the Facebook group and seeing you guys all again next Tuesday for the next Tuneful Tuesday stream.